We began our journey into the data professional world by covering the basics of data science, exploring careers, and discussing skills needed to succeed. In this section, we'll investigate the workflow within data-driven careers. You'll be introduced to a helpful organizational tool called the PACE model that can provide structure while allowing great flexibility when working on projects. We'll explore the elements of effective communication and some best practices when sharing your ideas with others. All of these skills and tools will help you prepare for your upcoming portfolio project. I know you're excited to continue. So let's get started. The most important part of any project is preparation. That involves thinking through all the necessary steps and anticipated tasks. Let's say you were planning a dinner party. You would start by planning the theme, menu, the guest list, and all the other details. Next, you might check the reservation list, dietary restrictions, or take a trip to the grocery store for ingredients. Afterward, you would return home to prepare your dishes, clean your space, set up the table, and get ready. Because you set up so much beforehand, the evening will be awesome. While this scenario may be fictional, or not, it offers some wise advice. As a data professional, being able to visualize data, predict outcomes, and quickly pivot away from obstacles makes you a problem solver and a great asset to any organization. Benjamin Franklin once said, "By failing to prepare, you are preparing to fail." After almost 3 centuries, it still applies to something as simple as a dinner party or as complex as a deep space mission. Regardless of the project, having a structural framework in place for how to get that work done can be immensely beneficial. I've done a lot of data science consulting in my time, and one of the most common problems I've seen is teams coming to me thinking that they need advice on which tool or equation to use, and all of us finding out during the meeting that they're solving entirely the wrong problem. All the math in the universe won't help you if you don't point it in the right direction. But it's easy to get excited about those nitty-gritty details and rush headlong into a waste of time. The best teams I've worked with have adopted a framework to help them focus on the most impactful actions in the most efficient order, and they've had the discipline to use it to stay on track instead of running off into the weeds. For those of you who completed the Google Data Analytics Certificate, you'll recall a structure for the data workflow that was divided into 6 phases. Ask, prepare, process, analyze, share, and act. This framework is quite useful for a multitude of projects, but often with bigger datasets, you need more freedom and flexibility. The PACE framework designed for this program offers the same workflow and structure, but in a simpler way. PACE is a framework developed with input and feedback from our team of data professionals. The intent of PACE is to provide an initial structure that will help guide you through projects. The goal is to lay a foundation upon which you will develop your own workflow practices. The PACE framework helps you solve problems and make judgments quickly and efficiently. PACE is an acronym. Each one of the letters represents an actionable stage in a project. Plan, analyze, construct, and execute. In the plan stage, you'll define the scope of your project. You'll begin by identifying the informational needs of your organization. This is where you'll want to ask yourself questions like the following. What are the goals of the project? What strategies will be needed? What will be the business or operational impacts of this plan? Taking inventory of the project and the tasks required will help you get a better understanding of the context of your work and prepare for success. During Analyze, you'll engage with the data. You'll start by preparing it for your project. Here, you'll acquire the necessary data from primary and secondary sources, and then you'll clean it, reorganize it, and transform it for analysis. Then, you'll conduct a methodological examination of the data. You'll also engage in exploratory data analysis, or EDA for short. This will involve converting the data into usable formats, assessing the quality of the data, and then diving into the data to find as many potentially useful insights and directions as possible. You'll then work with your stakeholders to see which of those areas are worth pursuing in more detail, which brings us to the construct stage, where you're going to pursue a limited subset of all those potential insights that looked interesting to you in your EDA. And here is when you will work with other data professionals, potentially statisticians and machine learning engineers, to do things like building machine learning models and revising those, uncovering relationships within your data, and doing statistical inference about those relationships. Finally, in the execute stage, you will share the result of your analyses and your collaboration with your stakeholders, as well as the value that you've unlocked from your data. Here you will present findings to internal and external stakeholders, answering questions and considering different viewpoints. You'll also have an opportunity to present recommendations based on what you found in the data. You may discover that you revisit the planning and analysis stages as you refine models and incorporate feedback. A good way to visualize the PACE framework is as a completed circuit. Each of the 4 stages must be engaged for it to function correctly. The electricity or flow of energy in the PACE circuit is the communication between you, your team, and all the other stakeholders and collaborators involved. When you look at the stages in this manner, you might think that communication only flows one way. Well, you always do start with planning, but don't be afraid to go back and iterate. With PACE, new information and feedback can be incorporated in any part of the process. You might need to return to analyze to clarify some aspect of the data, and then jump back to execute to present this aspect to your stakeholders without the need to construct new models or dashboards. Along the way, you'll see how the PACE framework can be scaled to fit within the scope of any project. The model's adaptability will prepare you for a dynamic profession that requires a high degree of professional flexibility and communication. Regardless of where your career takes you, the PACE framework is a tool that provides a clear foundation and structure. Through the continued application of the PACE framework, you'll prepare for each course's portfolio project. Then you'll have the opportunity to practice your evolving skills. Each portfolio project will introduce opportunities to develop and strengthen your organizational methods. As you develop your own intuitive workflow, the PACE framework can be a great organizational tool. Next, we'll look at how communication is so crucial. When I was a kid, I used to love to take things apart so that I could see how everything came together on the inside to make something work. I actually still love doing that today. And this is so much easier to do with tangible things that you can hold and look at, like a pen, for example. I can twist the tip to pull each section apart. From there, I can pull the ink cartridge out and check out the way that the spring works in tandem with the top part of the pen to make it click. Studying the way things work becomes much harder when we start thinking about abstract concepts like communication. And you're probably wondering why it's important to talk about it in the first place. In your role as a data professional, you are the direct connection between the information inside the data and other project stakeholders. So let's take a closer look at some key considerations when crafting a message. All the communicative exchanges have 3 key elements that we need to keep in mind: purpose, receiver, and sender. When we think about purpose, I want you to think about the reason why the communication is taking place. In analytically oriented settings, you might find yourself in situations where technical pockets of information require analysis or reporting. On the other hand, there may be contexts that depend on strategic insights, which will be used to direct a company's financial or organizational efforts. The receiver is your audience. When you think about the receivers of your messages, I want you to think about who you are talking to. It's helpful when crafting communications to ask, what does my audience already know? What do they need to know? And it's important to keep in mind that every exchange can cause a rippled chain of events. As a data professional, you're often working as part of a distributed team across an organization. And that's why a message shared with one receiver may be used for reporting with or to others. The sender is the person responsible for crafting that message or communication. Yes, you. You're the sender. The sender is a crucial part of any communicative exchange. As the sender, I encourage you to think about the following. What's your relationship to the receivers? What's your role in this exchange? Are you reporting insights? Are you pitching ideas? Or are you identifying potential data inputs? Also, what personal biases might affect the message you're trying to share? At the heart of the relationship between purpose, receiver, and sender is the message or communication that you intend to share, which is impacted by all three elements. For this reason, the same message might be shared in dramatically different ways when the purpose and the receivers change from scenario to scenario. For example, you might know a data professional working on a complex project. They've been involved since the project was sparked by an idea in a meeting. The way they articulate the project pitch, structure, research, models, and findings will change depending on whom they're talking to. With non-technical audiences, they're much less likely to focus on details about the code used to program the model, and instead they'll focus on the impact of the project. When the audience shifts to other colleagues, your friend may instead choose to be very detailed about the code and project logistics. In both cases, the overall message exchanged, that is, information about the project, was the same. How it was crafted, the details included, and the way the information was organized, that's what was different. Now that we've examined the key elements of communication, we can really start to think about some of the best practices that will set you up for success when you communicate in your future job.
My name is Molly, and I'm an analytics manager on Google Photos. We use data to make the Google Photos app better for our users so that they can reminisce on all their memories of their life. Communication is everything in data analytics. You could say that coding is just communicating with computers, and then at the end of it, what the computer gives you, you have to then communicate back to other humans. Most of the time, they don't have a background in analytics or statistics, so you really have to put it in a way that anyone could understand. Being able to communicate not only what to do, how to do it, but then what the results are, I think is as important, if not more important, than the actual code. I would say communication is first really important when you're working through what your priorities are. So as an analyst, you'll get a lot of requests. Everyone's going to be your best friend and asking you for a lot of things. But it's really important to kind of take a zoom out of the trees and look at the forest and say, what is the most important thing I could be spending my time on? And usually that's not the request of the person next to you asking for something. So instead of saying yes to everything, which I did when I was early in my career, and then just try to burn the midnight oil and do everything in order of just first in, first out, I now say no to a lot of things. It's better to say, sorry, this is not one of my top priorities, and I'm not going to be able to get to it in the next couple of weeks. That's better than saying yes and then not being able to get to it in the next couple of weeks. So communication is important because you have to be transparent, and if you emulate transparency and trust, you'll generally get that back as well. You want to be transparent in what you're working on and keep your updates coming in frequently. There's very few times I've been annoyed that I got too many updates on something. Most of the time it's the opposite, and you're like, what is the status of this? Why haven't I heard on this? And your stakeholders are thinking that as well. We create these requirements documents for every analytics project, and you get sign off, and you say, this is what I'm gonna do, here's what it's gonna look like, here's how long it's gonna take. It's a little, over communication, but being on the same page is really important. There's a lot of data out there, and it is only growing. So the amount of people who can translate what's going on from zeros and ones on a computer into telling a data story, into producing really beautiful visualizations, into finding problems. At the end of the day, humans write code and humans make coding errors. So how do you spot those in a way that a computer couldn't? Or how do you think about what are the new things that we haven't even touched on that we could work on? There's unlimited amounts of things you can do with data. And I think what excites me is 10 years ago, nothing that I'm doing today was even possible. So what I'm doing 10 years from now is probably going to be not possible today. And the opportunity to get into the data field really means opportunity to keep learning and growing at all times.
Have you ever stopped to think about what makes communication successful? Surely you can think of a time when you witnessed a communication failure. I know I can. Communication is one of the most essential components in the exchange of ideas and concepts. It's a large part of everyday life and the foundation of all human interaction. It's also an important element of analytically focused work that isn't discussed as often as technical skills. In this video, I'm going to share a few tips for successful communication. My hope is that you'll rely on this advice in your future role as a data professional. Having a clear vision of why you're communicating is the first thing you need to consider. Your why depends on the context set by the business or organization that you work for, as we discussed in earlier videos. Your why is also informed by the project's mission statement, that is, the goals orienting the project. And when crafting any form of communication, use your why to guide the main ideas so that your audience can identify how to act or respond with purpose. Time is a currency in the professional world. It's very important to be efficient. As you draft or prepare to communicate, I encourage you to use direct language, minimize wordiness, and avoid unnecessary details. You should always strive for clarity. Use proper grammar and punctuation. Regarding vocabulary, keep it simple, choosing specific terms and avoiding technical language where possible. Break complex ideas into shorter sentences, especially when addressing a diverse audience of professionals from outside data analytics. This will make the points within your communication easier to understand and remember. You may recall from earlier videos that I mentioned the 3 key elements of communication. These are the sender, receiver, and purpose. Now I want to add to that list and consider the setting for your communication as well. Are you having a discussion at lunch with a coworker? Are you creating an email to update all the stakeholders about your progress? Or presenting the results of your analysis to a boardroom of executives? Where and how you'll be delivering your message will have a direct impact on the way you shape it. Let's use a simple example to help illustrate effective communication. Like using a hose to water a plant. The straighter the hose, the better the water flows. Now, bend the hose or tie a knot into it and the flow of water is interrupted. In this analogy, the water is like the intended message. The hose is whatever method you've selected to deliver your message. Knots in the hose symbolize misunderstandings within the mind of your audience. When the knots are created, the free flow of information stops, even if you continue to deliver information. As a data professional, you may find that a significant aspect of your work involves your ability to communicate with non-technical audiences. Your goal should be to meet your audience where they are. What I mean by that is, you want to be efficient in your communication and tailor it to the people you're sharing information with. Depending on how familiar they are with what you're sharing, you'll likely want to break down technical concepts into simpler terms. Avoid jargon, acronyms, and technical buzzwords. When everyone understands the intended message, you can avoid the knots and the flow of ideas can continue. Carry these practices through all types of interactions, email, messaging, and both virtual and in-person communications. As you continue throughout the program, consider ways that you would communicate the technical concept you're acquiring to different audiences. Also, remain focused on the purpose and setting of your communication. All these factors add up and make a big difference to how effectively you communicate as a data professional. Previously, you were introduced to the PACE framework. As a reminder, PACE has 4 stages: plan, analyze, construct, and execute. We also examined the rationale and key elements involved in effective communication. Now, let's investigate how they can be integrated together within data projects. At first glance, the PACE framework easily enables a wide view of an entire project's workflow. That is, each stage from planning to executing is logically sequenced with the beginning, middle, and end of a data project. As you may recall though, PACE is incredibly flexible, and it doesn't need to be employed in a linear progression. Often, iteration makes sense in projects. So let's unpack that with an example. For reference, we can compare it to the construction of a building. First, a blueprint is created. This is where the planning happens. Next, we lay the foundation. We can do this once we've analyzed the lot space and considered other variables like cost. Then we add the frame. After that, the roof can be installed. By the time the structure is ready for move-in, the builder will have progressed through the entire workflow, planning, analyzing, constructing, and executing the client's vision. In practice, the PACE workflow is meant to serve as a navigational tool. We created it with the goal of helping you understand the data professional's workflow, and as an aid you can consult in your future role. Now, let's return to the example. With the roof completed, that makes it possible to begin the inside construction, like installing drywall, electrical components, and plumbing systems. Each of these jobs also has its own PACE workflow, demonstrated on its own planning document within the larger blueprint, each requiring planning, analyzing, constructing, and executing. Just like the building example we've been discussing, as data projects move into the construct and execute stages on the global level, you may need to return to the earlier stages to incorporate additional data or feedback from other stakeholders. Even while the global project is transitioning into a new phase of PACE, there can still be upcoming tasks that are just beginning their PACE cycles. Regardless of where you might be in the PACE workflow, communication is what drives the framework to the realization of the project. At each stage within the framework, there will always be a need for communication to improve the workflow. This could be asking questions about your data, gathering additional sources, updating stakeholders on progress, or presenting findings and receiving feedback. One of the most important considerations behind the development of PACE was providing a flexible structure that allows you to adjust to changes within a project. Let's return to our building example. Let's say that during the installation of the electrical system, the property owner has communicated that they wish to have an additional charging port for electrical vehicles added to the plan. To facilitate the change, you would revisit the PACE framework to plan, analyze, construct, and execute this new request. Just like in this example, requests from other stakeholders can come in at any time. Regardless of the timing of an additional request or task, data professionals need to be available and accessible throughout the entire project cycle. Sometimes you may need to speak at a meeting or participate in a progress update. Additionally, you may update your progress within a tracking system. Email conversations and chat discussions will keep others involved and up to date with where you are in your workflow. I'm excited for you to develop some hands-on experience practicing different communication strategies through each stage of PACE. You'll have opportunities to do this later in the program. For now, I want you to remember that a good data professional is a proactive communicator who responds to questions in a timely fashion. Keeping other stakeholders up to date with clear explanations can make you the most effective data professional that you can be. You're nearing the end of your first course, and we've discussed some key concepts, especially in the areas of communication and data workflow through the PACE framework. As you're preparing for your first portfolio project, I'd like to point out a vital consideration when using the PACE framework. Each stage of the workflow is not mutually exclusive. Different roles, teams, projects, and workflows may put emphasis on different stages of the PACE framework. So, although you may be working on a task that is primarily focused on, for example, analyzing data, there will still be elements from the other stages of the PACE framework that will affect your work as well. Let's take a look at the way this program applies the PACE framework. We can take a global perspective and say that the earlier courses are heavier on planning and analysis, and the later courses are for construction and execution. But that's a very wide view. If you take a closer look, you'll discover that each course is operating within its own PACE framework. In your Python course, you'll be acquiring knowledge to enable you to use the language for data analysis. Because you're acquiring new skills, much of the course may be classified in the planning stage of PACE. As you move on to that course's portfolio project, you'll shift into analysis. But this will have elements of planning, constructing, and even execution as you create the final product. Next, you'll learn how to prepare data to reveal the stories within. Here, you'll lean into the analyze stage. As you become familiar with the foundations of statistics, you'll continue analyzing data, and you'll construct some new tools for your toolbox that you'll apply in your portfolio project. While you're exploring regression, you'll extend your experience in the analysis stage and put it into practice by constructing data models. You'll also practice executing by summarizing the results and insights to provide value to your stakeholders. Advanced modeling will further expand your analysis and construction skills within that particular portfolio project. And even while you're expanding your knowledge of career resources, you'll be operating in the planning stage as you collect information, the analysis stage while processing information about the job market, and the constructing stage while assembling your resume and portfolio. You'll have an opportunity to bring all your newly acquired knowledge and skills together in the capstone project. Here, you'll have the chance to use the entire PACE framework through scenarios and data provided by our industry partners. Even though some stages are more prominent than others in each course, you'll still see evidence of all the stages throughout. You could look at PACE as the scaffold that surrounds the exterior of a building. With this scaffold in place, different tasks within the building can use the same workflow structure without disrupting the entire project. As you can see, the PACE framework is an excellent way to help guide you as you gain knowledge and confidence. Understanding how to classify tasks and proactively interact will help you develop good habits and eventually develop your own professional workflow. You've reached the end of the data workflow overview. You've covered a lot of material and concepts. Great job! You saw how the PACE framework can be used to help structure and guide you through projects. Next, we learned about effective communication and how it can be used within the PACE framework. We looked at the external factors that can have an impact on data analysis. We also looked at the external factors that can have an impact on data analysis, like bias within data. As you're preparing for the weekly challenge, don't forget that you can review any of the materials we covered. In the next section, you'll begin working on your first portfolio project. I wish you the best of luck.